Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look and installing the eTrailer trailer hitch receiver on a 2023 Subaru Legacy. Now this is what your hitch is going to look like when it's installed on your Legacy, and it's a very clean look. This bolts into the frame rails of the vehicle, or at least the channeling of it, so really the structural part is all hidden behind the rear fascia, giving you a nice clean look with the only thing visible being the receiver tube opening. Now this one is going to be a 2" by 2", which is kind of the standard size for a lot of different accessories, which is really good because you're going to have tons of options when it comes to ball mounts, bike racks, or cargo carriers. Either way, all those are going to stay in place with a 5/8 pin and clip. Now, not included with the hitch, but a lot of times when you pick up accessories, they'll have that pin and clip included. If you plan on leaving your accessories on your vehicle for a while, it might be worth getting a locking pin and clip, which we have plenty of options here at eTrailer. You can lock that in place and know that no one's going to walk away with whatever you have loaded up. We have a rolled style safety chain loop, nice and open for your standard S hooks, or even a larger clevis style for hooking up those safety chains if you plan on pulling a trailer. Now, speaking of towing a trailer, you're going to want to adhere to the weight capacities of the hitch. This is rated fairly decent with a gross trailer weight rating of 3,500 pounds, and that's going to be the weight of the trailer plus the accessories loaded onto it. You also have a tongue weight rating of 350 pounds, and that's the downward pressure that's put on the inside of the receiver tube opening. So that'll be your bike racks and cargo carriers, anything that's suspended by the hitch. Now, keep in mind, you do want to check the vehicle's owner's manual before just towing a trailer, making sure that the vehicle is capable of that. Also, all of your components that you'll be using, and take the lowest number out of all of those. That way you're not overloading anything and you're staying safe while towing. The profile of the hitch looks really good on this car. It barely protrudes past the rear fascia, so you really don't have to worry too much about your chins hitting it, but that is really nice when putting accessories on that fold. That way you're gonna have clearance. It shouldn't make contact with the fascia. And in fact, from the center of the hitch pinhole to the furthest point of the rear fascia, it's actually more recessed than the hitch at 2 inches. So really any accessory you have that may fold up should work fine with this. Now, keep in mind, you may not be able to open up your rear trunk. You might be okay, but either way, you can just fold those down. And as far as ground clearance goes, this one's fairly decent for a sedan. Comes in at 11 inches, and that's going to be important for choosing accessories that maybe have a raised shank just for when you go up inclines, as those tend to tilt towards the ground. If you're planning on towing a trailer, this is also beneficial to determine the rise or drop necessary for a ball mount. You can measure the coupler of your trailer, compare it with that, and then get your rise or drop necessary. Now, as far as difficulty of installation, on the website as well as the instructions, they'll say it's a 10 out of 10, and that's because the fascia does have to come off. You remove the bumper beam and it slots in there. But overall, this fascia actually comes off fairly easy compared to a lot of different cars, so don't let it scare you. It's really not too bad. You could probably knock this out, and I'd give yourself about 2 hours, maybe a little bit less, but you only have to install the hitch once, and for a clean look like this with a 2" receiver, I think it's totally worth it. So I'll walk you through all the steps to make sure you get yours installed. Let's take a look at that. To begin our installation, eventually we're going to have our whole fascia coming off to get the hitch in place. So we're going to start by removing some of the fasteners that keep the fascia up, and they're going to be plastic push pins that kind of go along this outside edge. There's 4 slots on here, so you can kind of just take a flathead screwdriver, or I have a trim panel tool, just push that center out, pry that, and then we should be able to get the whole thing out once we have that out. It's kind of fighting me here a little bit, so just take your time and get these removed. And we're going to be putting these back in later on, so I do recommend having a nice organized spot to keep them. Now, there's a total of 7 of these on the fascia. If you do have mud flaps, there's also going to be 2 tucked on the bottom. You can go ahead and get those removed. If you don't have mud flaps, don't worry about that. Now we'll head to our wheel well, and we're going to find that we have a smaller plastic push pin with just 2 slots. We'll go ahead and get these removed. And then if you have those mud flaps, we already removed that 1 plastic push pin. We have an 8mm screw that's one down here, and then 1 up here, so we'll go ahead and get those removed, and then we'll just repeat on the other side. Now there is another plastic push pin that's kind of located inside the wheel well. We don't need to remove that. This is allowing us to kind of just pull this mud flap back and be able to get our fascia pulled off. Now we're getting ready to remove our fascia, and this is a step that you're probably going to want an extra set of hands. It can get pretty bulky, and sometimes there's going to be electrical connections that you're going to want to separate as you pull the fascia off, so don't pull it back too fast or hard. I put painter's tape along the fascia as well as the rear quarter panel, and that's mostly as you take this off, it's going to have a little bit of friction rubbing against it, and also when we put it back on, so it's a nice easy way to protect our paint from getting scratched. And to get the fascia pulled off, pretty easy. Since our mud flaps are nice and loose, we'll just kind of push this back, and then you're going to want to just start peeling on the corner here, and we'll start to get the clips to pop off. So you'll work on each outside, making your way towards the middle, and just a little bit of pressure as you kind of peel on it should kind of get there. Now in the center, there are going to be some plastic clips. Sometimes they can get a little bit tricky. I do recommend popping your trunk just to kind of make sure you have clearance for this to pop out. And then as we kind of pull back, we'll get these clips to remove. There we go. We do have a plug here on our driver's side that we're going to want to separate. Looks like they're for our proximity sensors, so we'll just push on the center tab, and then we should be able to pull this apart. Sometimes these can fight you a little bit, so just take your time. And with this unplugged, we'll just set our fascia side somewhere safe to where it's not going to get scratched. So now we need to get our bumper beam removed, and you may have this foam cover. We'll just take this off. I just kind of prime this out, and that's going to give us the access holes to be able to get to the nuts and bolts that we have. Now through these slots, we're going to see that we have 2 bolts and a nut. These are going to be a 14 millimeter socket. Now we will be reusing the hardware, so keep this handy. And get this all removed. Now keep in mind as you take off the hardware, it's very possible the bumper beam will come down. It's aluminum, so it's fairly light, but just make sure it's not falling on you. Now it is going to rest on those studs where the nut was. We'll go ahead and get this pulled off and set aside for now. Now we also have the bumper beam mounting points that go onto the body of the vehicle, and our hitch is going to slide in here, so we're going to get these removed as well. Now before we get our hitch in place, we're going to be running some hardware through the inside of this frame channel, and we're going to be passing it down and bolting it up, but we'll find that there is a plastic cap kind of on the far end. There's actually 2 of them, but we're going to be using the rear hole. So if you kind of just reach underneath here, so to get that out, you can pry from the bottom, and it's just kind of a rubber cap. You may need to kind of push it along here. So I'll grab a screwdriver and just kind of push this out. If you're having trouble, you can see underneath by the muffler that there's a tab. You can put a pair of pliers on there and pull that out. Be careful, the heat shield is very sharp. I reached under there and kind of cut myself, so just take your time, have some eyes on it, pry this out, and that's going to be our hole that we pass our carriage bolt through. So now we'll slide this in. And what we'll do is once we kind of get it to this point, we have those studs, just take those nuts that we removed previous and just kind of hand tighten this on. That way it holds itself up. So now that hole where that plug was, we'll take the coiled end and we're going to feed it up through there. And then we're going to slowly pass that coiled end through the outside here. So if you need to, you can put a small bend on it. It's kind of an awkward angle here, but we'll feed this up. Just kind of grab this with your finger. You can also use a pair of needle nose too if you need to. And then we'll take our carriage bolt and we'll just thread this on. And then we can just jostle this to where we get that carriage bolt to drop in. Now you may need to kind of move the hitch around for it to drop directly in. You want that squared portion of the carriage bolt to sit into the hitch. So go ahead and repeat the same process on the other side of the vehicle. Now underneath where we have a carriage bolt passed through, we'll just pull off our fish wire. And very carefully, we're going to put our serrated flange nut in place. You want to make sure you don't push that back in the frame rail. If you need to, you can take the fish wire and just kind of loop it around the bolt. and then pull it towards the frame, and that way it's not going to push up. It's got something to kind of bite onto. And we're just going to get our serrated flange nuts started. Now, once you get your serrated flange nut on, just kind of hand tighten that in place. That way it's going to hold our hitch up. Now, with our carriage bolt holding that in place, we can take off that nut that we put on. And we're going to take the bumper mounting points and get these back in place. Now, we're going to use the nuts again, but there are longer bolts and conical tooth washers that we're going to replace the factory bolts with. It's just going to be a little bit longer to go into those weld nuts. So we'll take one of those, take the conical tooth washer, make sure the teeth are going to be facing into the metal that it's biting into, and I'm just going to kind of get this started. We're going to go ahead and also do the same thing on the other side, so go ahead and get your bumper support mounted up. So once we get those all aligned, we'll go ahead and we're going to snug these down. Now our new bolts are going to be a 17 millimeter socket. We're going to be coming back with a torque wrench, so just kind of get everything snugged down. And then we'll use a 14 again on those factory nuts. With our torque wrench, we'll get these torqued down to the torque spec found in the instruction manual. And this is going to be important, especially when dealing with weld nuts, because you want to make sure it's going to be tight enough, obviously, to withstand using the hitch, not become loose over time. But you also want to make sure it's not too tight, putting stress on those weld nuts. So we'll go through, we'll get these all torqued down. And if you need a torque wrench, you can get one here at eTrailer. You can generally go to an auto parts store and rent one for free. But going through, making sure that these all snug is going to be key. Now we'll get our bumper beam put back on. And then we'll just get our factory hardware back on and snug those down. Now there's not a torque setting associated with these. I would imagine if you use the same torque setting that you used on the previous hardware, that should be fine. Now don't forget, we need to tighten down the serrated flange nuts, and there's also a torque setting associated with those. Now if you need to, you can remove the exhaust isolator to give you a little bit more space. What I've done is just use a swivel on my 3/8 to get this tightened down. So whatever works best for you, but to remove the exhaust wouldn't be too hard. You just get that isolator off, use some soapy water to pry that off if you need to, and that should give you a little bit more of a straight shot, but a swivel does a good job here too. Now before we get our fascia put back on, we do need to cut out a small section to allow for clearance of the hitch. The instruction manual is pretty good. You're kind of using this as a reference because this isn't centered up. So what I've kind of did was actually mock it up to the vehicle to make sure we get some nice clean lines. So the instructions seemed more on the Outback, where this is very similar, but it's slightly different. So just kind of following this along, the same measurements apply. Just make sure, you know, it's nice and centered up, and if you need to, you can mock up your fascia. We'll go ahead and get this cut out. I'm using an oscillating tool that works really well. If not, a Dremel works fine. Whatever cutting method you have, you just try to make this as clean as possible. Once that's cut out, we'll just go ahead and you can take a file, or even the backside of a knife blade works pretty well, and just kind of get some of these burrs knocked off, just get it of a nice clean look. With that trimmed out, we'll go ahead and get our fascia put back on. Now make sure you plug your electrical connector back in before completely pushing the fascia on. And it's just going to go on in the reverse order that we took it off as far as hardware, so follow the instructions in reverse. And we should be able to get this snapped back into place. I got everything back in place, but I did notice that there is some clearance here where it's rubbing against the hitch that makes it really hard to get these all aligned back into the spots because it's not able to draw in. So measuring from this far end, I ended up cutting right at about 4 1/4. So I would recommend doing that as you cut back, and that way you have that clearance, everything will line up a little bit better. Now with everything put back in place, we officially have our hitch installed. It looks really good. All that's left to do, load up our accessories and hit the road. And that was a look and installation of the eTrailer trailer hitch receiver on a 2023 Subaru Legacy.